When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found peace. The houses were neat, the lawns were trimmed, and every driveway gleamed with shiny sedans and spotless SUVs. It was the kind of place where people waved as they jogged past and pretended their lives were as perfect as their landscaping. For a while, I blended in. My little house sat on the corner, with a big oak tree that shaded my driveway in the afternoons. I worked hard for that house. I wasn't some wealthy executive or socialite like most of the homeowners around me. I was a contractor. I built things, fixed things. My hands were rough and my truck was my lifeline. A faded blue Ford F-250 that smelled like sawdust and engine oil. It wasn't new, but it was mine, paid in full. That truck had been with me through storms, job sites, and more than a few 4 a.m. emergency calls. To me, it was more than a vehicle. But to the HOA president, it was an eyesore. The first notice came 2 weeks after I moved in. A thin, white envelope tucked under my wiper blade like a smug little warning. It was written in the sharp, self-important tone only an HOA could manage. Your vehicle does not meet the community standards of presentation and must be removed from visible areas. First, I laughed. Removed? From visible areas? I parked in my own driveway, well within the property line. Surely this was a mistake. But the letter wasn't a mistake. It was a threat. The HOA bylaws, written years before I arrived, stated that no commercial or non-luxury vehicles shall be visible from the street. Non-luxury. That single word burned into my mind like a brand. Who decided what was luxury? Who decided what counted as community aesthetic? It didn't matter that my truck was clean, registered, and legal. It didn't matter that it wasn't leaking oil or rusting away. It was about appearances, about keeping up the illusion that everyone in this neighborhood lived a certain kind of life. And leading that illusion was the HOA president, Patricia Campbell. Patricia was the kind of woman who made rules because it gave her power. Her house sat right in the middle of the block, like a throne at the heart of her little kingdom. She wore designer sunglasses even on cloudy days and always had her tiny dog tucked under one arm, as if the world revolved around her manicured hand. When I didn't move my truck, the fines began. $50 the first week, then $100, then a letter threatening further action. Patricia even took photos. My truck in the driveway at dawn, at dusk, at all hours. Proof of my crime. I tried to reason with the HOA board, but Patricia dominated every meeting. She spoke for everyone, with that icy smile that didn't reach her eyes. The other board members nodded along like puppets. It didn't matter what I said. Patricia had already decided I didn't belong. That was the day I realized this wasn't about my truck. It was about control. I stopped attending meetings. I stopped responding to her letters. Every time a new fine arrived, I tossed it into a drawer. I knew they couldn't tow my vehicle, not from my own driveway. I read every clause in their little handbook, every comma, every vague phrase. And buried in the legal jargon was something interesting. A loophole. IT said that no commercial or non-luxury vehicles shall be parked on the street or within driveways visible from the street. But it said nothing about vehicles parked on lawns. Technically, that would fall under temporary placement if it wasn't obstructing sidewalks or fire hydrants. It wasn't something most people would ever do. But I wasn't most people. Not anymore. Still, I wasn't ready to make a move yet. I wanted to be smart about it. Over the next few weeks, I watched Patricia's routines. Every morning at 7:45, she took her dog on the same walk around the block, coffee cup in hand, sunglasses on, the world hers to inspect. She always passed my house first, always looked right at my driveway. I could almost hear her thinking, still there, still not luxury enough. It became a ritual, a battle of wills fought in silence. I kept my truck polished just to spite her. I even waxed it one Saturday morning, right as she walked by. The look on her face told me everything. But Patricia didn't back down. She doubled the fines. Then, she sent an official notice claiming I was devaluing the neighborhood. That one hit a nerve. Devaluing the neighborhood. Because of a truck. Because I didn't drive a Lexus or a Tesla. Because I worked with my hands. I realized there was no winning by playing her game. She controlled the board, the rules, the votes. So if I wanted to win, I'd have to play by the exact same rules, just smarter. That night, I started planning my revenge. That I wanted something that wasn't just petty, something poetic. Something that would make her regret every smug letter and every snide look. I wanted her to wake up one morning and realize she'd pushed the wrong person. For weeks, I researched city codes, HOA bylaws, property lines. I learned more about zoning laws than I ever thought possible. And then, one evening, as I scrolled through a classified ad online, I saw it. The perfect opportunity. It was massive, ugly, and technically, completely legal. I contacted the seller immediately. A few days later, it was mine. I had it delivered at dawn, under a heavy gray sky. By the time Patricia stepped outside for her morning walk, I was standing on my lawn, watching the delivery crew lower it into place. Right in the perfect spot, she froze. Her coffee cup stopped midair. Her dog whimpered. From where she stood, she could see exactly what I'd parked directly in front of her house. And for the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, Patricia Campbell didn't look so sure of herself anymore. The best part? There wasn't a single rule in the HOA bylaws that could stop me. By the next morning, word had spread across the entire neighborhood. People who usually never looked up from their hedges or their phones were suddenly walking their dogs past my house, pretending not to stare. Some smirked, some shook their heads, but everyone had the same question on their faces. Was that thing really parked there? And yes, it was. Right on my front lawn, gleaming in the morning sun, sat a 30-foot bright yellow school bus. It was a retired one I'd bought at a surplus auction. A little beaten up, sure, but not broken. The letters School District 12 were still faintly visible along the side. I'd cleaned it up, removed the seats, and made sure every legal requirement was met. No registration issue, no safety hazard, nothing that technically violated HOA policy. It was ugly, enormous, and absolutely within my rights. And best of all, it was parked perfectly, just within my property line, not blocking the street or the sidewalk, directly facing Patricia Campbell's house. The moment she saw it, her composure cracked. For someone who prided herself on being untouchable, Patricia didn't take humiliation well. That bus was more than just an eyesore to her. It was an act of rebellion, a symbol of chaos in her pristine world of uniform mailboxes and manicured lawns. Within an hour, I got the first letter, hand-delivered, of course, by one of her loyal HOA followers. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten in angry, swooping cursive. A demand for immediate removal of unauthorized structure due to community disruption. But here's the thing. The bus wasn't a structure. I'd read the bylaws enough times to memorize them. Vehicles parked on lawns weren't explicitly prohibited as long as they didn't cause obstruction or pose safety risks. And since it wasn't commercially active or under repair, it didn't meet any of their defined violations. I was, by every definition, completely in the clear. Patricia, however, was not used to being told no. Over the next few days, she launched what could only be described as a campaign of war. First came the letters. Then came the meetings. The board was convened in an emergency session to review community standards. I wasn't invited, of course, but I could hear the heated voices echoing from her open garage door as I worked in my yard. The next morning, she tried to involve the city. An inspection truck showed up, and a pair of municipal officers came to look things over. I stayed calm, polite, and handed them every document they asked for. Registration papers, property boundaries, photos proving the bus was safely parked and not leaking fluids. When the officers finished their inspection, they nodded, thanked me, and left. Patricia stood at the edge of her driveway the entire time, sunglasses trembling on her face. The moment the truck pulled away, I could see it hit her. She'd lost round 2, but Patricia wasn't one to give up. If she couldn't beat me with rules, she'd try to shame me instead. She started sending emails to every homeowner in the community, passive-aggressive bulletins about unsightly displays and inconsiderate neighbors. She even called for a neighborhood cleanup day, hoping to rally support. But the turnout was disappointing, to say the least. What she didn't realize was that not everyone liked her as much as she thought. Most people had tolerated her for years. They'd smiled, nodded, and pretended to agree just to avoid her wrath. But now, Seeing her lose control, seeing her rage over something so petty, gave the neighborhood a sense of quiet satisfaction. I started noticing small acts of rebellion popping up everywhere. One neighbor left his trash bins out an extra day. Another put up a lawn flamingo, something Patricia had banned years ago. Someone even spray-painted luxury this on the inside of their fence where only she could see it from her porch. The bus had started a movement, and the more she tried to regain control, the worse she looked. Then, something unexpected happened. A local blogger, one of those neighborhood watchdog types, heard about the story. They wrote a cheeky little article titled, "The HOA President versus the School Bus." It was meant to be lighthearted, but the story spread like wildfire. Within days, it hit social media. Suddenly, people from outside the neighborhood were weighing in. Thousands of comments flooded in, mocking the HOA's obsession with luxury and praising me for fighting back against HOA tyranny. Patricia hated it. She called an emergency HOA meeting, open to all residents, to discuss the reputational damage caused by certain individuals. I went, of course. I wanted to see her squirm. When she stood up at the front of the clubhouse, her perfect posture and crisp white blouse couldn't hide the stress lines forming at the corners of her eyes. She spoke about community values, about maintaining dignity, but everyone could feel it. The tide had turned. People were whispering. Some even laughed under their breath. She snapped midway through, slamming her folder shut and storming out. For someone who'd ruled the HOA with an iron fist for years, that moment, that single loss of composure, was the beginning of the end. After that, Patricia stopped walking her usual route. Her blinds stayed drawn more often, and the once pristine lawn in front of her house started showing patches of neglect. A small but telling sign. Meanwhile, I kept the bus right where it was. Clean, polished, perfectly parked. It became something of a local landmark. Kids loved it. People took selfies with it. But Patricia wasn't finished yet. Not entirely. One night, just after midnight, I heard a strange sound outside, a soft hiss, like air escaping. When I stepped onto my porch, I saw movement near the bus, a shadow ducking behind the front tire. Someone was out there. By the time I shouted and flipped on the floodlight, the figure was gone. But I saw the damage, a long, deliberate scratch across the side of the bus. Deep, fresh, and unmistakably vengeful. That I didn't have proof. Not yet. But I didn't need a detective to tell me who it was. Patricia had crossed a line. And this time I wasn't going to just play defense. The scratch across the side of the bus wasn't deep enough to ruin the paint. But that wasn't the point. It was deliberate, calculated. A silent message from Patricia Campbell that she wasn't finished with me. For days, I left it there. Didn't buff it out, didn't paint over it. I wanted it visible. A scar of her desperation, shining back at her every time she stepped outside. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I had already learned that Patricia thrived on control. She believed she could bend people to her will simply by being relentless through rules, fines, and intimidation. But now she'd resorted to vandalism. It wasn't just about enforcing HOA guidelines anymore. It was personal. And if there's one thing I've learned from working with my hands all my life, it's that there's always a way to expose what's hidden. All you need is the right set of tools. So, I set a trap. The next morning, I went out and installed 2 small motion-activated cameras, one on my porch and another hidden inside the bus itself. Nothing fancy, just basic security gear I'd used on job sites. I positioned them perfectly to cover every angle of the lawn and driveway. Then, I waited. Days passed quietly. The neighborhood had mostly gone back to its routines. The story had lost a bit of its viral spark, but the tension lingered. Patricia had retreated into her fortress of blinds and whispered phone calls, yet I knew she couldn't resist the sight of that bus. Her ego wouldn't allow it. On the 4th night, just after midnight again, the cameras caught her. She crept across the street wearing dark clothes, carrying a small can of spray paint. Her tiny dog, the same one she paraded around every morning, waited on the sidewalk, leash tied to a post. Patricia crouched next to the bus, glanced around, and started spraying. Thick, black letters formed across the side of the yellow metal. Trash! The cameras got everything. Her face, Her hands. The act itself. The next morning, I didn't go straight to the police. Not yet. I knew the perfect way to make her pay wouldn't be behind closed doors. It had to happen in the same arena where she'd humiliated others for years. The HOA meeting. When the monthly meeting rolled around that Friday evening, the clubhouse was packed. Word had spread that something big was coming. Patricia, still pretending to be in control, sat at the front table with her usual smug posture, hair perfectly styled, a stack of papers neatly aligned before her. She called the meeting to order, voice steady, tone sharp, trying to regain her command of the room. She talked about maintaining standards and respecting property values, the same old script everyone had grown tired of hearing. That's when I stood up. The room quieted instantly. I didn't speak for long. I just told them that I had something to show the board, something that involved a serious breach of conduct by one of its own members. I plugged in my laptop, connected it to the projector, and played the footage. At first, there was silence. Then gasps. The grainy night vision footage showed Patricia's unmistakable silhouette crossing the street. The spray can. The words scrawled across the side of the bus. And then the camera zoomed in, catching her face in perfect detail as she stepped back to admire her work. The entire room erupted. Some people whispered in disbelief. Others laughed outright. One man in the back muttered something about karma finally catching up. Patricia stood frozen, eyes wide, her mouth slightly open but no words coming out. It was the first time I'd ever seen her truly speechless. She tried to recover, stammering something about fabrication and digital manipulation. But no one was buying it. The other board members avoided her gaze, some even shaking their heads. The spell she'd held over them for years had broken right there, in that fluorescent-lit room. By the end of the meeting, she was voted out as HOA president. Unanimously, the following week, I filed a report with the police armed with the same footage. The officers were polite but firm. Vandalism was vandalism, no matter how fancy your address was. Patricia received a citation and was ordered to pay for the cleanup. After that, she disappeared from public life. Her blinds stayed shut permanently. Within a month, her house went on the market. Rumor had it she moved to another gated community 2 towns over, one without a bus in sight. As for the bus, I kept it there for a while longer, just to remind everyone of what had happened. But over time, I started using it for something else. I converted the inside into a small workshop, a place to tinker, to think, to unwind after a long day. Funny enough, people started stopping by. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to me before came to chat, to ask about projects, to share their own HOA horror stories. The same folks who once looked down their noses at my truck now laughed about how ridiculous the whole thing had been. Eventually, the new HOA president, a soft-spoken guy named Tom, asked if I'd consider joining the board. He said they wanted more practical voices this time around. I declined. I wasn't interested in rules or politics. I just wanted peace. But every now and then, when I looked out my window and saw my old truck gleaming in the driveway, I couldn't help but smile. It stood there proudly, unbothered and unapologetic. A symbol of every working man and woman who'd ever been told they weren't good enough for a neighborhood built on appearances. The bus eventually found a new purpose, too. I sold it to a local youth center that turned it into a mobile classroom for underprivileged kids. They repainted it bright blue, filled it with books and art supplies, and gave it a second life. The day they drove it away, I stood in the yard and watched it turn the corner. Patricia's house was empty by then, the curtains still drawn, the for sale sign tilting slightly in the wind. It felt like the final chapter closing on a story I hadn't planned to write, but one that, in the end, wrote itself. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's exposure. It's peace. It's standing your ground when someone tries to make you feel small and proving, without saying a word, that you were never the problem to begin with. As the bus disappeared down the road, I looked back at my old truck, parked in its rightful spot, and thought about how everything started. One petty fine, one power-hungry president, one stubborn man refusing to be pushed around. And in that quiet moment, under the same oak tree that shaded my driveway, I knew one thing for certain.